My name is McWilliams. I am a reference archivist at the Pennsylvania State Archives. If you've never heard of us or know where we're located, we're located in Harrisburg, PA, not Philadelphia, right in the Capitol complex. Pennsylvania State Archives basically collects, preserves, makes available the documents of permanent value for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Basically, we collect the records of the state agencies. Department of State, Auditor General's Office, Comptroller General, state agencies. However, in addition to that, we do collect private papers of private citizens and companies in Pennsylvania to give you an idea of kind of who we are, where we are, and what we collect. Well, today we're going to be talking about the genealogical resources at the Pennsylvania State Archives. We have several million documents, and there's probably one document in there that's going to be of some value to you. Unfortunately, with limited time, I can't go over all the documents, so I'm going to focus mainly on the principal records that you may be looking at when you come by, and major areas, subject matters, vital records, military records, and resources like that. So without ado, we'll get started with probably the number one thing people ask us about. What vital records do you have at the archive? I can sympathize with this woman because I just had another child in February. So I'm really a screaming baby myself. Probably the biggest thing that we have vital record-wise, the most popular right now, is the birth and death certificates from Pennsylvania. These are just recently made available through Act 110 in 2011. Basically, that act released birth certificates 105 years or older and death certificates 50 years or older to the archives for public access. Before, you had to go through the Division of Vital Records, and they did restrict those records to immediate family members, and it could take several months to get them. We have those now. They are accessible, or will be accessible on Ancestry. All of them, at least all the death certificates by the end of the year. They should start appearing in May, is what they tell us. So the first chunk will be 1906 to 1924 with the death certificates. Births will come around probably the beginning of next year. Indexes to those are on the Department of Health's website. www.health.ca.us. I should have it on the handout. I know I said that fast, but need references. Yes?
I can't hear you.
Can't hear me? Is that better? There you go. All right. All right.
Give us the website again.
What's that? It's www.health.state.pa.us. And that's the Department of Health's website for the indexes to those records.
Thank you.
Now, beyond that, we do have the 1852 to 1854 birth and death records. They're the duplicate copies that are sent to the state. If you've done research at the county level, most of the counties have their copies, but these are the duplicates that they send up to the state that we have in our collection. They are currently available on Ancestry.com, so you don't even need to come see us. Hop on. Birth and death wise, that's pretty much it for what we have original-wise in our collection. It sticks to basically what Pennsylvania is post-Civil War periods when you start seeing the birth and deaths appearing, with some exception. Marriage records. We have some early marriage records. I don't really like calling them marriage records. I like to refer to them as marriage lists, or not even put marriage in there and just say marriage license purchases. The governor's accounts that we have listed here, those have the names of the individuals purchasing marriage licenses in the state. It doesn't mean they're married. It doesn't provide a date of marriage at all. Early ones just give the groom's name. Later ones do give the groom and potential bride, but it doesn't prove a marriage and it doesn't provide a marriage date. It's just they're buying a marriage certificate or a marriage license. We also have marriage bonds in Philadelphia, 1784 to 86. Very similar to administrative bond along those ways. Not too much information on those. And again, the records of birth, deaths, and marriages, the duplicate copies that were sent up to the state. And at the very bottom, records of marriages. Again, duplicates that were sent to the state that were recorded at the county level. And let's just take a look at some of these records. This is an example of the marriage list under the governor's accounts. As you can see here, not much. On the left side, you see those are the men buying it. But like I said, in some of the later ones here on the right, you do see the women listed. Mary Reed's year with the John Paul, the number of licenses purchased, and then you just have a very generic date and a year. Again, not specific to the actual marriage, but a very strong hint that they're going to get married. If they're spending the money, they get the license. All right. Some of you may be familiar with these. These are the 1852 to 1854 birth, death, and marriage records. I just have examples of births and deaths, but the marriages are very similar in structure. Information is typically better than what you'd find, let's say, in the death record for Philadelphia for that early time period. You do often get the names of the parents and other significant information. The one caveat to these is the law wasn't very well complied with, so some counties there's only 2 or 3 people listed in these for the whole county for a 2-year period. Yes?
Did your archives only have the birth records for what you showed, those years that you showed, which was like 40 years worth?
For the birth certificates?
Yeah.
Yes, right now. Every year an additional year will be added to our collection. It will be scanned, and then Ancestry will then put it online. But under the law, the birth certificates 1906 and 1908, they have to be over 105 years before we get them.
Okay, you had I think it was 1852 to 1854?
Yes.
So there's nothing between 1854 and 1906?
In between those time periods, they're recorded at the county level beginning in 1893 to 1905, and then you have some exceptions basically being cities. You have, let's say, Pittsburgh, 1870 began recording some of these records. Erie began recording earlier than that. But there are gaps that you're going to find. If your ancestor was born in a county, there's going to be a gap for those time periods until you get to 1893. I'm going to cover those registers when you get to the county records that we have. An example of a birth record that we have, the 1906 and 1908. This is what you're typically going to find in those earlier ones. As you'd expect, the names of the parents. What I have found useful, actually recently, that I wouldn't expect, is the number of children and the number of children living. We have a lot of people contacting us, trying to establish whether there was one of the children dying young, or stillbirths, or sometimes they're done. And this is an example of a death certificate. Pretty standard, up to 1963. So small changes, but they stay pretty typical, where you're going to get the name of the individual, birthplace of the parents, if known by the informant, and the cause of death. Cause of death is always an interesting one. We always keep a list of the most interesting. This is actually my ancestor, William Blaine Dowd. He was killed, he was run over by an automobile, big news in Corey. And they also note that the person was exonerated who ran over him. But I like to show this because the informant here is his wife. So you expect the information is going to be pretty accurate, and it is. But she gets the father's name wrong. It's the Cullen, not the Calvin. So if you're looking for Calvin, you'd be lost. But that's just sort of something. It's coming from someone else, not the person who died. County records. Our holdings are primarily microfilm copies of what the county has. In Pennsylvania, they're not required to send us the records. So the bulk of the records that we have available to a person visiting are going to be on microfilm. We have 18,000 rolls, approximately 18,000 rolls of microfilm of county records. And they span the whole gamut. Probate records, deed records, court records. You can expect to find most of our microfilm is going to be pre-1900, and it's going to cover the major items: deeds, probate records, wills, tax records, and along those lines. I would recommend before coming over, because every county is going to be different. It really depends on how much the counties have microfilms over the years. Lycoming County, not much of anything. They really don't microfilm much. A lot of the northern tier counties haven't microfilmed a lot. All those records are still up there, mostly in original format. So I recommend going to record group 47 and 48 on our finding aids online. I know that the web address is hard to read, but it's on your handouts, so you can leave. But if you go to our main page and click on finding aids for collections, you can get to record group 47 and 48, which will have a list. It's up at the top of the page where my name is. And we do have originals from the counties that they sent us, but it's a lot, for most of the counties, it's going to be less desirable or less sought out records. It's the records that the county just wants to get rid of to clear up space. But they're interesting nonetheless. For instance, this is an original that we have. It's a dog register. From the early 1800s, late 1800s. Beautiful picture. If you're researching and happen to have a dog, or your ancestors have a dog, you never know. They could have a nice little picture. But we have things like that, attorneys lists and whatnot, that kind of want to get rid of. Very, yeah, it's a very big picture. Census record. I usually go quickly through this because for the most part, the big bulk of the records that we have for census are going to be the federal census. On Ancestry, on Family Search, on a number of different sites. Those microfilm rolls that we have are largely untouched now. They're very dusty. No one goes over in the corner. However, Pennsylvania did have its own census. They had a septennial census that was done every year, every 7 years, from 1779 to basically 1863. The catch is, most of the records don't survive. For most counties, there's going to be maybe one of those census years that's available. 1800 seems to be the most popular one of the collection. And I don't like calling them census returns anyway, simply because they're a list of taxable inhabitants, and it just has the names of the taxable inhabitants and their occupation in some cases within a given township. They're very similar to a tax record for that time period, for the most part. But we do have them. We also have the U.S. direct tax of 1798, also known as the glass tax. If you're not familiar with it, a great source for finding information on buildings, on a particular person's property, and finding out who's the owner and who's the tenant on a particular piece of property. We do have microfilm copies of that, and we'll take a look at it, what one page looks on like that. And we also have the Pennsylvania Farm Census returns. And this is specific to Pennsylvania. The Department of Agriculture did two census since 1924 and 1927. Again, it's only going to provide the name of the owner of the property, the farmer themselves. It's not going to provide names of the children and the rest of the family there. It's very similar to 1840, 1830 census where it just has the age categories and checks off on there. However, it does have additional information which I'll show you when we get to the pictures. All right, basic population schedule, U.S. federal census. I don't think I have to really spend too much time talking about that. This is an example of the septennial census. This is what I mean by telling you it's largely, well, it is a tax list for all intents and purposes. It was used to establish representation in the state house. So you have lists of people, and they do include women. If there's a widow, taxpayer, she will be included on there, and I think there is a woman on here, so you can get a name of a woman. And number 12 over there you go. Margaret Anderson. Anybody have an Anderson living in Hopewell Township? All right.
What county?
Hopewell, what is that? I don't know, there's more than one I know. So, I'll just say yours. This is 1807. Like I said, it's very similar to a tax list in some cases. This is a U.S. direct tax schedule. There's an A, B, C, I've seen D, E, and F schedules. A lot of the information overlaps. But what's beautiful about it is it does tell you who the occupant is and the owner of the property. So if you find your ancestor on the tax list listed as an inmate or tenant, well, you can find out who owned that property that he was living on. It also gives you the dimensions of the dwelling house and the number of outbuildings that they have on the property, the number of lights, which are window panes, the number of windows in the property. It gets the make, wood brick, wood. I've seen cabin and stone and house. I don't know what the difference is because I've seen a cabin listed as made of wood. I've seen a house made of wood. They don't really make a difference between the two. You can find more information that's interesting to a particular individual. Sometimes the assessors that made the list will make notes about how sloppy a piece of property is. So-and-so's property is in horrible shape, listed on there. But if you're doing any kind of research on a house within a given township, an old house, you believe it's before 1800s, this is #1 place to go. This is where a lot of our historic preservation people go. They're researching a house that predates predates 1800, to get an idea of what was on the property. And this is an example of the farm census. It's a very long sheet, so I had to kind of break it up into individual pieces. As you can see, you have the name of the farmer, the owner of the property, and then right here you have the age ranges. What I love about this, it's very similar in some regards to the agricultural census that was done 1850 to 1880. It'll list the type of stuff that they're producing on the farm, how much. It'll also tell you how much of the land is actually being used, how much is left fallow. It goes on to tell you horses, mules, basically whatever they could raise on the particular farm. And what I like the most is this last column here in the 1927. Equipment and conveniences, running water, furnace heating system. You have telephones, radios. So if you want to get a glimpse into a person's house in 1927, how, tech savvy they were in 1927. Yeah, we had radio. Look, one guy in the neighborhood had radio. Everybody went over to his house. And also, if they got a power station of their own plant to generate electricity on their property. Now, this is the 1927. The 1924 has similar questions on it too. This 27 one is available online for free on our website. So you can go on, you can check. It's basically arranged by county. So if you know the county that your ancestors live in, you click on there. I think then it's broken down within a township or general area. You can scroll down and take a look. If you go on our website, again on your handout, go to digital copies of documents. There'll be a link to this. 1924 is not. You have to swing by the archives. You have to have some way to get people in the door. State land records. The biggest question are, what are state land records? What do I mean when I refer to state land records? What I mean is the initial transfer of land from the state government, depends on the Commonwealth, depending on the time period, to a private individual. These are the documents created entitling the piece of property, as opposed to deeds, which are between private individuals, or secondary transactions between the state and the private individual. There are 5 documents, primary documents that are created. You have the application, the warrant, survey, return of survey. You can largely forget about the return of survey because it's not really heavily used, and the information from there is on the patent. The patent is the final deed, the title to the property. Indexes to these land records are all available on our website for free. Again, go to our main page and click on the land records link. It'll take you to a page with tons of links. And if you want to after here, I can try and explain how each of them are used. It's available on there, along with the warranty township maps that we have. They show the original warrant tracks within a township. And also the actual surveys. We have the surveys available online. So if you find an individual, you can check out their survey. Yes?
Are they by county or like name?
It depends on the index. There's a whole lecture. I can certainly tell you about it. The primary indexes are the warrant registers, the patent indexes. Those are the 2 primary ones that most people are going to be dealing with. The warrant registers are by county that the warrant would have been issued under at the time. And then it's by the first letter of the surname within there, and then chronologically within each letter of the surname. The patents are grouped by the series of patents. So you have the A, AA series, T series, H series, and then within there it's first letter of the surname, and then kind of by volume. Those are the main ones. There's other ones. If you, I can talk to your off on that. Well, here's an example of an application. I refer to this as a pre-1794-95 application. Not much there. Basically, you get the name of the individual, the number of acres that they purchased, and a very general description of the piece of property, largely because a survey hasn't been done yet. So they have to do geographic features and neighbors, John Doe next to the river. And most of these early ones are not signed by the individual requesting the land. It's usually a justice of the peace or someone from the land office or an agent working for them. This is what I refer to as a post-1794-95. Again, there's no solid date. Example of an application. By that time, they required more information. So you still get the same good stuff, general location where the property is and how much. But it then goes into when the first improvement and settlement was of the piece of property. This particular individual first improved about the month of May, 1,800. Yeah, 1,800. And he produced grain on there and built a house. They vary in detail. My one ancestor, Jane Campbell, it goes on to say that she settled there in 1797, but someone made improvements in 1795. She had to go back to Lycoming County before going back to Erie. And then she raised a barn. She gives the dimension of the barns, how many acres that were cleared on a piece of property. So you can find a great deal of information. But this is a typical one. You get an early settlement date and the fact that they planted crops and built a house. And this is a warrant. What is a warrant? A warrant is simply an order for a survey to be performed or accepted. This is for my ancestor Jane Campbell from Waterford Township, Erie County. Again, it uses the basic information from the application. You know, it's giving the bordering property owners, which is very useful, next to her. And then it also gives the terms. You know, how much for 100 acres. And then right here, it tells you interest from date. What's interesting is, she settled in 1797. She has to pay interest from 1795, and that first person was there. That's just the way they did it. So some people could lie about it. So there's a potential for lying as it comes to that, because they paid interest from that date. And the survey, everybody recognizes the survey. These are available on our website. If you find a reference, you can take a look at them and print them off. What I like to do is compare the names, the names on the survey with the names on the warrant. There could be decades in between when a survey was actually done and the warrant was initially issued. So you get the names changing over time, which gives you an idea of the neighborhood when your ancestor was there, or when he left, or why he left the neighborhood. And it gives you a little bit of blurb about the warrant being issued and the date of the warrant. And this is a patent. The patent is very similar in format and content as a deed would be. A normal county deed. It's going to give you a verbal description of the property. It's going to tell you, in this case, the warranty on the person who initially started the process and the name of the patentee who eventually got the title. And just like a deed, there can be more information. You can find relations. In this particular one, although hard to read, it tells you, it provides Jane Campbell's 2 sons, William and John, provides her grandchildren's names, all her grandchildren's names from William, and also states that she was remarried to this Robert Randolph. Before I found that, I didn't know where she went. She just disappeared. But apparently she married Randolph McCain, Jane Randolph, who then subsequently died. But just like a deed, that's the kind of information you may find. If you're unlucky, they say, through sundry conveyances, the property was transferred. Through sundry conveyances and legal assurances. I don't know legal assurances. But military records. Pennsylvania State Archive has records that span from the French Union War all the way up to the Vietnam conflict. The types of records within those is going to vary by conflict and time period. We also have the National Guard enlistment in veterans card files up to 1945. I'd like to stress that. We get a lot of calls from people who were part of the National Guard, say the 1960s, 1970s. Those records are still held by the division, or the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, contrary to what their website says. But we have up to 1945, so if they served the National Guard, we should have a record for them in Pennsylvania. And like I said, the types of records are going to vary depending on the time period and the conflict. I have a handy-dandy little slide here that gives you an idea of what you're likely to find. For pre-Spanish American War, most of the records are going to be muster rolls and related records. All right. What do I mean by related records? Payrolls, receipts, accounts, returns, strength returns of companies. So if you're looking for a Revolutionary War veteran, you're most likely going to find some type of class roll, muster roll, militia certificate, paying them in some way, shape, or form. There's not going to be a file specific to that individual. It's just going to be a muster roll file with a given unit. So it's very important to know the unit for these early conflicts when trying to find anything. And there are indexes and other ways to find that unit But within the unit, that's when you find the individual's references in the records. Spanish-American War and later, Pennsylvania created or offered compensation to veterans. They paid out, usually the max was $500 for service in any one of these wars. And the veterans themselves had to apply for it, for the most part. Different in all ways, shape, and manners in the earlier war. And we'll go over a couple examples of these to give you an idea of the difference between the two and the types of records. One thing to note is Korean conflict, the floods by Hurricane Agnes in 1972 destroyed the applications. So we don't have the applications. What we have are the batch sheets. What do I mean by batch sheets? Those are the batches that the applications were filed in. And what they are is the list of the names of the individuals, the number of months domestic service, foreign service, and the amount that they were paid. But to access those, you have to know their service number. That's usually the stumbling block. The only reason they are so important because they prove honorable service. So we still get a lot from veterans groups and trying to prove honorable service so they can get veteran benefits. So when we have an entry that shows that they honorably served, they can get those benefits. But it's still important. Vietnam conflict, those are restricted because clearly those people are still alive and it has confidential information such as Social Security numbers, information on that. However, it is available to the veteran themselves and the immediate family. And of all of these records, this is the one that's going to have DD-214, as it's referred to today, separation and discharge papers. They were required to file those with this one. These other ones, no. They weren't required to file. Well, they were required to file them, but they weren't kept by the state. They were sent back. All right. This is an example of a muster roll from the Revolutionary War. This is actually a class roll. And this is the typical information you're going to find on it, just the name and the unit. Not tons of information. You're not going to find the list of ages, where they enrolled at, where they're mustered out at, any kind of physical description of them in these records typically. If you're going to find any reference to family members, it would be an appeal book. I can talk to you afterwards about what that is. But this is a typical record that you're going to find for an individual soldier in the Revolutionary War. Not much information, but you can make something out of it. Indexes to the Revolutionary War are available. These are very similar to the compiled service cards that the National Archives has for the Revolutionary War service. Basically, these are cards that were created by the archives, abstracting information from the muster rolls. It's available free online through the digital archives link that I mentioned in the handout. So you can go on there. This is the place that you go. If you think you have a Revolutionary War ancestor, I recommend going here first, taking a look. There is one caveat. Not every record that we have, not every muster roll got a card. What they did to save time is if there was, let's say, 3 class rolls, because they had to do them every year. There was 3 class rolls for a given unit. The guy was in all 3. They might create 1 card for 1 year and put it in there, figuring, I guess, that people would go in and look into those actual records to get the rest of it. So if you find them in there, we may have more information. We do have some pensions, although I don't stress that. The pension records in our collection deal largely with the War of 1812 and the Revolutionary War, but most of them are just pension ledgers, don't provide much information at all on the individual veteran. They'll give where they resided at the time when they received it, and a list of the payments that they received from the government. This is an example of a War of 1812 application. These applications began to be accepted in 1866. So most War of 1812 veterans were dead by then. Most of their widows were gone too, so there's not many, but there are some. And it typically provides just the unit that the person served in, the dates of service during the War of 1812. And what's nice is they do have signatures of the veteran if they survive. If the widow applied for it, you typically did not find any kind of evidence of marriage. Because they basically had someone just attest to the fact that she was married to him. They usually don't give marriage dates or anything. So we know, I'm a neighbor, you know that she was married to him, this particular individual. We do have pension records for the Civil War, about a dozen, very few. And there were individuals that died during the war, so they're pre-1865, 1861, 1865. Not many at all. This is an example of a muster-out roll for the Civil War. Provides significantly more information than you'd get in the French and Indian War, the War of 1812, or the Revolutionary War. This muster-out roll is basically a summary of their service, and we have a fairly complete collection of the Pennsylvania units that served in the Civil War, their muster-out rolls. It gives the name of the individual, the age, where they enrolled, when they mustered in, when they were mustered out. The remarks section is the best part because that gives information as if they were wounded, killed in action, if they deserted, if they were discharged by special order. That's where you're going to find all that information cited. Sometimes you get interesting things. For instance, this Charles D. Fuller, enrolled 1861, 18 years old in Harrisburg. She was discharged, and I do mean she because they found out she was a female. So she was discharged at the camp. And there are funny things in there. And again, very similar to the Civil or the Revolutionary War, we do have a card index to it. These were done by the Adjutant General's office, or begun by them as an index to the Bates volumes. I don't know if people are familiar with the Samuel Bates history of the Pennsylvania Volunteers, 1861 to 65. But these are created as an index, so you have the name of the veteran, the unit, and the volume and page number in that volume. Over the years, however, as researchers requested information, they added to the cards. If you find this, we probably have more information. If you find this, someone has already gone through the muster rolls that we have and the muster and descriptive rolls, and they've copied pretty much all the information you're likely going to find in the Revolutionary or in the Civil War records that we have. This is an example of an application. This is actually from our World War I service and compensation files. Again, the veteran would have to apply for it, but it provides great information. You're going to get the name of the person, most likely the date of birth, where they were born, parents' names, unless they're dead, then they usually just put deceased. The unit that they served in, the dates of service, campaigns they were in, if they were injured at all, dates of overseas, when they're discharged, and of course their signature on it. And again, this would be in the file if they did apply for it.
What was the compensation?
Compensation was based on their services. It's pretty straightforward for most. It was $500 for pretty much every single war. Even up to today, they're still giving these out to veterans of the Persian Gulf War. They gave them out, and they're pretty much $500 all the way through. Vietnam, same way, 500, 500, 500. Yeah. That was the max. I know back in World War II, they had to take out loans. The state had to take out loans to cover it. It was just too much money. There's tens of thousands of the applications. There may also be other stuff in that World War II file. This is an example of one of the Historical Commission forms. They wanted to document the Great War. So they sent these out and made these available to people to record information about their service. So if they filled it in, they sent it into the state, they put it in this file. The front side, this is actually the back. The front side provides basically a similar summary as the application does, but sometimes the people just kept on writing. And on the back here, this guy gives basically a whole summary of his service, when he entered, what ship he came over on, where he landed, where he went to, and when he came home. You can also sometimes find photographs in there. But that's more typical of the 28th Division, which was federalized. It was the National Guard, Pennsylvania National Guard. There's photographs of those individuals. And then pretty much, even if they didn't apply for World War II or World War I compensation or sent in that form, we should have a card if they served from Pennsylvania. This was sent out by the War Department to the state that provides a summary of their service. So you get the basic information, the service number, their age, the units that they served in, promotions, and any engagements, if they were wounded, and so forth.
Where did they get that information?
This came from the records that used to exist with the federal government, from what they had relating to World War I. But they had the fire 73 at the National Personnel Records Center that destroyed a lot of the records. But these were sent out at the time, just after the war, as evidence of individual service.
You have that for World War II, yeah?
We'll get to World War II. But this one, this is a great example of what you can find, at the very least, in the World War I. Does anybody recognize the name? I included in there. He is a famous Pennsylvanian, surprisingly. Robert C. Hoffman, York Barbell. He was the founder of that, the father of modern bodybuilding. What he's referred to. But yeah, if you drive down 83 and you see that sculpture of the guy lifting, that's supposed to be a sculpture of him. World War II, here we go. I'm disappointed in the World War II. They were required to get compensation. They were required to send their separation papers, but the state sent them back to people. So the only thing that we have is the World War II application, if they applied. There were no service cards sent out by the War Department or anything. If they applied, this is what we have. It still provides good information: name, dates of foreign and domestic service, when they entered, where they entered, and when they were discharged, and selective service information down here.
And they had to be honorable?
It had to be honorable, yes.
So we shouldn't apply it.
Yes, and if they did, there's a big stamp on it. They used a big stamp. If they didn't, they had a cutoff line, and that's where the stamp you usually see more. It didn't qualify because of the time frame, but they do have disqualified. Just fix that little half a page, just so no one would miss it. And on the back side, it does provide information on the family. Gives both his mother and father, if they were still alive, and he had one child and his wife on there, and of course his signature. What I dislike the most about them, or disappointed most, it doesn't provide a unit for the Army. There's no unit information, and that's usually the one thing that's missing. You do get the service number, which helps if you apply to the National Personnel Records Center, but it doesn't provide a unit, which is horribly frustrating. Unless they were in the Navy. The Navy, they provide stations. So if they're on a ship, they provide the ship name that they've served on that ship, or if they're on some kind of recruitment duty, they'll provide that information. But for, the Army Air Force, the Army, and even the Marines, they don't provide the unit that the person served in, unfortunately. Yes?
Were those done regardless of what state they served from? If they went from New York State?
They had to be from Pennsylvania. This information, they either had to be in selective service from Pennsylvania or have lived in Pennsylvania when they enlisted. We do have people that are right along the border that may have been working in, let's say, Ohio, but they registered in Pennsylvania. They could apply. But they couldn't do that in any other, if they lived over in New York and then after the war moved to Pennsylvania. Yes?
Can you get this online, or do you physically have to go to this?
A portion of these are online right now. Ancestry scanned up from A to G. They stopped scanning them because they started on the death certificates. They have now just restarted scanning them, so those should probably be up. The last, 2/3 of the alphabet should be up by probably next year when they get to it. But they stopped for the death certificates. But if you have an Ancestry A to G, they're on to Ancestry right now. These people look at it. The Spanish-American War applications are also on Ancestry right now. Not World War I yet. They're on the wish list. National Guard, this is a typical enlistment paper. Information you're not going to get on it, the names of the parents unless he was a minor, unless they needed to get permission from the parent. But it does provide information on the individual, where they were born, gives physical description, inhalation, chest size, exhalation, chest size. The more important one, or the more useful one I find, is the actual veterans cards. The veterans cards themselves has a summary of their service. This just tells you, who they are, where they were living, and how long they were going to serve. The cards themselves will provide information as to whether they got a promotion, if they were called up for federal service, when they were discharged from federal service, and when they eventually left National Guard service. The cards, 1920 and earlier, are available online. 1867 to 1920, those veteran cards are available online through our digital archive link. If you go there, that you find on our handout. Next, we do have posters from World War II, if anybody's interested in those. Immigration records. I lumped ships lists and naturalization records together for this. What do we have for ships lists? Well, most people have an idea of these German passenger lists from the Strasburger Hink volumes, Pennsylvania German Pioneers. It's available on Ancestry. But we hold the originals. We hold the original lists, all three of them, the A, B, and C list for most ships. We also have the less known, the passenger name list of the Health Office Registry. 1792 to 1794, very limited time period. I have not found one person ever looked at them except for myself. But if your ancestors are from the British Isles, 1792 to 1794, or from the Caribbean, or if you're doing research on African Americans, one, they list the ships from Londonderry, the names of all the people on there, often the children too, in family units usually grouped together, the dates of when they came, and of course the port that they left from. For people coming from, let's say, Bahamas or the Caribbean, they often note if they're bringing any servants with them. Often note if it's a slave that they brought with them into the port. Not heavily used. It is a very narrow period. It's my belief that they had a greater period at one time, but only this volume seems to have survived over the years. And of course, we have naturalization records. Supreme Court and Courts of Mias Prius. This is the 1740 to 1777 or 1773 records. They're largely lists for the most part. I'll show you an example of that. And then the Supreme Court naturalization papers. Those are available on Ancestry.com. And the index to those are too. If you go on Ancestry and you look under like Philadelphia naturalizations, it's included in that volume. The P. William Philby, Philadelphia naturalizations. It's the SC that's listed in the entries next to the individual's names. You can find those on Ancestry right now, instead of stopping by.
What's a naturalization? I mean, I know what it is for the U.S., but at that time period, it was England, it was Britain. So naturalization from what?
From continental Europeans.
Okay, so like the Germans
The
coming
Germans,
over and
yeah.
being
Yeah,
naturalized as British
yeah.
citizens. Okay.
Yes. And the peak of that was in the 1760s. The peak of the Germans being naturalized in there. And I'll show you an example of that list to give you an idea of it. This is an actual ships list that you find or transcribed in Strasburger and Hink's volume. You really have to use his volume in conjunction because most people, including myself, cannot read most of this German scribble. And it gets even worse than this. This is actually pretty good writing. And this is an example of a B style. This is an Oath of Allegiance list. And this is the same list in Strasburger's Pennsylvania German Pioneers. Much easier to read. Much easier to read. So if you look at it here, like Johann Ludwig Steele, Seipel, he's right up here. This actually isn't too bad to read. This is an example of that naturalization list. There we go. This is an example of those 1747 to 73 lists. Not much of a naturalization list. It's going to give you the name of the individual, the county that they're residing in, and then the date of sacrament when they took the oath. Yes, they did make, for instance, I don't know if this is the Quaker one, this might be the Quaker list. The Quakers couldn't swear an oath. So they had workarounds for some of these things. And for other religions where there might have been an issue with Mennonites and so forth. All right, I'm going to speed it up. Example of a Supreme Court naturalization. Again, if you're from Germany, you're likely going to get some good information on there. At least in the province before the German state was established. Again, on Ancestry. Miscellaneous, kind of the catch-all group that we have. We have so many records. One, photographs. We have a lot of photographs. These are the most famous photographs probably in our collection. You see these around all the time, especially with the anniversary of Gettysburg. This is Pickett's Charge. These are original veterans of the Pickett Charge recreating it at the 50th anniversary. We have all those photographs in our collection. The handshaking over the wall, I'm sure you've seen that. That's all in our collection. We also have occupational records. These are examples of the Pennsylvania Railroad voluntary relief enrollment cards. It was voluntary, the individual could enroll, kind of like an insurance plan. If they were injured, they got payout from this. What's nice is you can get information about the individual, sometimes their parents' names, and what their occupation was.
And how do you access those?
Those, you have to come to the archives. Those haven't been scanned. You come in there, you put in a request, and we'll take a look for you and see if we can find it. They're in alphabetical order within series. There's several series of these cards. So what they'll do is search through all 5 series for you.
What time frame is it?
They cover from about they have 1886 up to the 1960s, but they cover individuals born from largely 1860 time period. You also have some minor records. This is an example of a minor certificate. These certificates are largely for the Tunis region. Again, they're kind of in alphabetical order.
How far back do those go?
1930s, really. There's some that are earlier and some that are later, but those are for like foremen, electrical foremen, kind of higher up jobs. The average miner in the bituminous region, their certificates are around 1937, 38, late 1930s.
What records are there for people who were mining in the Freeland, Wilkes-Barre area in the 1800s?
There's probably something like this if they were injured. That's usually the only time they really cared about the miners, that early. I mean, they weren't really recording the names of them, they weren't certified or anything along those lines.
No company records?
For the most part, no. There's not many company records. There's
Companies keep records?
What's that?
Did the companies keep records?
They did keep records. We do have records for some mining companies, but it's largely accounts. And there might be a record if they rented a house, a company house, or might be a record along those lines. This is a registry of accidents, again, mining. This is transcribed and available on our website. It gives you information about when they were injured, if it was fatal, what the accident was. And they typically blame the employee, in case you wanted to know, because they like to assign blame.
Was there steel observation records?
Not so much, no. No, not in our collections. We really don't have any steel employee records. No, forges and furnaces we may. Depends on what forge and furnace they were working at. No textiles, no, we don't really have any textiles, sorry. We do have the Eastern and Western State Penitentiaries and Allegheny County Workhouse records on our collection. This is from our Western State Penitentiary records. So if they're after 1907, you're likely to get a mugshot. Unfortunately, not for Eastern State. We don't have the mugshots for Eastern State, but we do have a lot of the registers. I put this one on here because this is the guy's nickname in prison. Poor, unfortunate boy. I really want to know the story behind that one. And then we have a whole boatload of maps. A lot of our county maps we scan and put online. You can access on our website, but we have a lot more, covering the whole gamut. Geographical, county-wide, mining maps, and so forth.
These names, are these the names of people?
Yes, these are the names of, the property owners, the individual houses or the individual squares, or the proximity of where they're at. All right, kind of ran to the end real quick, but these are our hours. Swing by anytime you can. We are in Harrisburg, and my email and phone number on there if you have any questions.